Robert James Kroner. I was in the Army Medical Corps, 676 Medical Collecting Company. Yeah, I was living in Blairsville, Georgia. My dad had gone to work with TVA, and we were all sitting listening to the news, and all of a sudden my mother started crying, and she said, hush, hush, hush. And they were announcing that, well, Roosevelt was announcing that the Japanese had bombed Pearl Harbor, and it was a mess, and he was asking Congress immediately to go into it. And I was 16 at the time. Well, I was asked what organizational group I'd like to be a part of, and my dad was active with National Guard in Mobile for years, and his company there was an ordnance company, and I said, ordnance. Well, my test grades put me far above that. In fact, just below the Air Force. And so they put me into the medical unit. I started my journey at Fort McClellan, Alabama, where I went for my examination. And then it came to Fort Mac out here for a reception. And then I went from here to Fort Mac to, now things get away from you. It was Abilene, Texas. It was the largest medical replacement training center. And we spent 13 weeks there, suffering through the heat and the dust and everything. Shipped over to North Africa after Rommel was out of the way. We're there for a couple of weeks. Then we were shipped over to Italy as soon as the port of Naples and Rome was cleared. And we were attached, we were an independent medical company with we were not attached to anything. They sent us to a airfield north of Rome to go through glider training. And we were there for several weeks, long enough to go into Rome, see the Vatican and everything, which is quite impressive. And then we were towed out onto the tarmac, and we went off to southern France. We were the airborne. It was the only medical company that was ever airborne. Finally landed. It was odd. There had been a glider corps go in earlier in the morning, and they were, just a mess. Glider sitting in the top of pine trees or sycamore trees, flopped over on the ground, crashed into trees, and when they crashed into trees like that, every one of them was dead inside. And came in, the pilots let out a long list of profanities and jerked the glider up, and we settled back down and just landed without any incident. And we had a trailer and 5 men and an officer, and the pilot and co-pilot in the glider with us. And my lieutenant was Sam Perlmuth, who was a brother of Jan Pierce, the opera singer. And at that time I was doing some singing, and he always wanted me to sing. We ever had a party, I had to sing one particular song. Anyway, he got out, and miraculously our Jeep landed right next to us. So we landed without a scratch on our gliders or anything. But that's the last time they used gliders because it was such a heavy loss there in Normandy. There had been a parachute drop earlier in the morning, and it was in the middle of a grape field, grape vineyard, and huge bunches of grapes. I've never seen anything like that before. And we were there for a couple of days to get everything settled down. And we had taken over a chapel that's set up on the hillside, and that was our aid station. And right next to it was the old nuns' quarters, and they turned that into a hospital for the few days we were there. And we had paratroopers with broken legs and glider casualties, and the worst thing I ever saw was this one young English boy. He couldn't have been more than 16 because they drafted him earlier in England than we did. He actually died of fright. He went into such a deep withdrawal that there was no way they could bring him out of it. And I thought that was such a tragic loss for such a young boy, and a handsome boy. Then about that time, the beachhead broke through, and we could evacuate all of our injured back to the hospitals on the beach. And then we began to move around where we were out of the way, but where we could give medical assistance. And I guess that went on for about a week or 10 days. And then everything began to calm down. The only troops that were German troops that were in southern France were mostly just work troops. They were not frontline soldiers and everything. So our forces just went right through them. We moved on then to, we moved our convoy down into Freyas, and were there for a few days. And then we moved on towards Nice. And when we got to Nice, we were stationed in the Hermitage Hotel, which they had taken over we were collecting. There was another echelon back of us, and they had set up a hospital in the dining area of it. We were then assigned the job of running 3 rail units. They were just single cars. One of them went up to L'Escarène, which is where I was stationed. Another one went down to Cap Martin, which was just on the other side of Monte Carlo. And then there was another one that was up on a river that came down through Nice. There wasn't much activity along the Italian-French border because the Germans didn't want to have to defend it, and we didn't want to have to go on that rocky cliff. And I mean, it just was like that. And if you've ever seen pictures of it. But every once in a while we would get a bombardment from Menton, which is right on the border. And they hit the theater at the casino once and knocked out a section of the wall. And that's the theater that the Red Shoes was shot in. Monte Carlo was off limits to American troops because it was an international city, independent principality of its own, and they didn't want to get involved in any of the negotiations about American troops or any other troops being in there. And I guess we were in southern France about 6 or 8 months. And then they began to push the Germans all out of France and were lined up along the Rhine River. And they decided that they needed a medical company. So we packed up and went up to Nancy, was where it was. And that was our staging area. And we trained in the ducks to go back and forth across the Rhine, because all the bridges were gone by then, except for one. At Strasbourg, they had a pontoon bridge, a double pontoon bridge, and we went across on that. And then just follow the troops in across Germany, and never had time to stop and really set up a post at any one place, because the Germans were getting out of the way. They were headed for that point down there in Germany where Hitler was supposed to go, and he didn't make it. And we followed them until the surrender came, and we were somewhere in the neighborhood of, oh gosh, in an area of southern Germany. There's a whole series of cities. But then we went down to a little area called Starnberg on Starnberg Z, and took over a series of buildings and houses down there and set up our aid station, and began to collect all these little German hospitals. They had them scattered everywhere, all over Germany. And our job was to bring them in. And since I didn't have enough points to come home when my company came home, we were assigned to another company, 737th Medical Collecting Company, who had administrative control of all these consolidated hospitals. And they put me in charge of one hospital in Rosenheim. It was quite an experience. Here I am, a PFC, and there's all of these high-ranking German doctors and everything, and the staff of the hospital. And I had the word to say yay or nay. And I stayed pretty much out of it because I didn't know what their operation was. I guess I was still 19. I had my 19th birthday in Italy, and I won't tell you how I celebrated it. When we got into France and saw the need for other technicians, they took us into the dispensaries and everything and trained us to do quick emergency medical treatment. And so that's what we did for the rest of the war. We boarded a ship there and came back across the North Atlantic, and we left on Thanksgiving Day from our company and hoped to be home by Christmas. Well, we were on board, but the weather was so bad in the North Atlantic, and the ships were just like corks bouncing around, till we didn't get into New York until, New Year's Eve. And you don't realize how things change so. And I was from Mobile, and that's about as far south as you can get, the old South. And at that time, when I went into the service, I had a real strong Southern accent. And a couple days later, I was at home, and my older brother, first thing he says, "You talk like a damn Yankee." It was 1943, September the 23rd, 1943, to January the 5th, 1946. And I've often said that I wouldn't take $1 million for the experience, but I wouldn't give 10 cents to do it again. It's somebody didn't want to be involved in. Somewhere near Darmstadt, Germany, was where I was when we heard the war was. And we were just outside Heidelberg when we got the news that Roosevelt had died. And oddly enough, the Germans brought us the news. I want to go home. I just wanted to go home. I think, and everyone, I think that was their original reaction was, okay, we've done it, now let's get out of here. And Germany wasn't a very nice place to be at that time. One of the things that a lot of the guys from the medical company wanted to see were the concentration camps. I didn't want to see that. I was very well aware of the fact that they existed. I knew what they had done to these people. And not all of them were Jews. That was the crazy part of it. If you disagreed with the Reich, you went to a concentration camp. I guess the first night we were on French soil, because we didn't know exactly where the German troops were, and here we were out in the middle of a no man's land. And even though the local people supported us, they pretty well stayed away because they didn't know when the Germans would start bombing, even though we were a medical outfit. And I guess not knowing what could happen, I guess that first night there was pretty bad. Well, it was just, well, here comes another boatload, you know, because there had been, Fort Dix was where we debarked. Well, yes, and this was at Freyas. You always had a stray. He never told you who he was or where he was from, but he had left his unit. And when we were at Freyas, it was a maintenance area that we took over to set up our station in. And at the far end of it, there was a German soldier that had been shot laying there. And he was not a German, he was a Czech or something, a Pole or something like that had been pressed into service because it was a maintenance area there. And he had a gold wedding band on his hand, and this guy that was just there, just roaming around, came back and said, "Hey, that guy's got a gold ring on his finger. Anybody want it?" "Well, no, we don't want it." So a little bit later, we heard a kabang. He'd gone back there and shot the guy's finger off and taken the ring. And I thought, scavengers are scavengers, but that's pretty low. But I guess people, according to the circumstances of the time, would react in some way that they probably wouldn't react in a normal situation. And but I can never understand why he thought that little gold ring was worth mutilating somebody like that. We had an area that we laid out the corpses, and someone would come to us and we know that there was just nothing we could do for them, so we just made them comfortable and laid them off in a room, and then when they passed away, they were wrapped up in either a parachute or blankets and laid out in an orchard. And then the grave, the body people would come along and collect them. And it was, I never was very much troubled by death, because I said sometime during your lifetime, you're born to die. That's it, you're going to die. Where and when you have no control over. And that was the thing, maybe, that these people that were laid out there, their parents had no idea that they were dead or what. And I still don't understand how they got them all back home and in the right places. One of my mother's very close friends, her son, was in the, what they call that unit. It was responsible for collecting the bodies and putting them in coffins and identifying them and shipping them back to the States. And he was going to be a mortician when he got out. And the first thing he said when he got back, his friend who was father-owned mortuary in Mobile, asked him when he was coming back. He says, "I'm not." He says, "I've seen enough of that. I don't want to see any more of it." We had one paratrooper. He must have been a football player or something, because he was a big guy. Both of his legs were broken here, and they had put those ladder splints on him and bound him up. And he could walk, but it was painful, very painful. Well, he had to relieve himself. And we didn't have urinals, but what we used for urinal was a canister that the plasma came in. And we were using those, and he says, "Don't give me one of those, I can't use it." He says, "I've got to go." So he convinced me that I could help him get to the bathroom. Well, dumb me out, okay, I won't do it. I got in there okay, got him situated, and when he got through, he said, "Okay, Bud, I'm ready." I said, "Okay." So I opened the door, and he just fell right, passed out. Well, I got chewed out all directions for doing that. But I couldn't get anyone to help me, so I just said, "Okay, I'll do it." He said, the captain, the major said, "Tell him to shit in his pants." This staff sergeant in charge said, "There's a guy over there wants to talk to you." And it was the guy that had passed out. And he says, "I want to thank you for the help you gave me, even though you got chewed out for it." He says, "I thank you for it." They had miraculously fitted the bones back and everything, because he was in a cast. And I always wondered if he got back to the hospital okay, and it turned out all right. Staff from this hospital had gotten permission to go to a weekend camp. We had to walk to it, several miles. There's this one large chalet-like building, and the bunks were built in just long rows. You climbed over the end and got in. They had straw mat pads in them, and you had a blanket and you rolled up. And I was soundly asleep, and all of a sudden I got covered up with all the girls. Most of them were aides in the hospital. One of them would come in every morning and wake me up, shake me and say, "Get up, 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 up. Have to clean, come, go, go, go." And so she came climbing in and got in next to me and I thought, uh-oh, but nothing happened. I mean, I wasn't that crass. Armistice Day. I grew up with that being Armistice Day. And to me, it's still Armistice Day. I don't care what they do with it. But I guess if people want to celebrate it and feel that they have to, that's okay. But I don't want it. I don't want to be a part of it. Well, it's the flag of my country. It has a long history of change and everything. I don't like to see it degraded in any way. To me, to go to the dump and see a flag laying out there, to me is an insult. That's not the way we should honor our flag. To me, that's sort of something that we have really lost contact with, is a person's honor. Because after all, that's the only thing you really have is who and what you are. And it just, I don't know.